Adam Nicolson, thank you very much for being a guest today.
Well, it's a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I always start with my Inside the Actors Studio questionnaire. What is your favorite word?
My favourite word in the world. Heavens knows what I don't really like. I like the word world, but I use it far too often. And so I've now fallen out of love with the word world. So I'm always saying, yeah, it's a world in itself, in this world, in the world of Homer and so on. And it's an incredibly lazy way of approaching things. Like the word great, I think, should be banned. Like the phrase deep dive, I think that should be banned, don't you? And I also think the word pleasant. There's few words more offensive than the word pleasant.
I mean, the next question was going to be what's your least
Yeah,
favorite?
definitely pleasant. Somebody just asked me this yesterday. Pleasant, and then I thought deep dive. Deep dive, the way in which people say deep dive nowadays, it implies that you necessarily spend, the huge proportion of your life just trivially skipping along the surface, and you occasionally choose to go further in. Well, the implication of deep dive is that life is essentially meaningless. And that only when you kind of go down, the other thing people call it nowadays is a rabbit hole, don't they? And I just think that is a terrible way of thinking and being. And one should be really hugely engaged the whole time. So it should be more like a whale, in other words, very occasionally coming up from your life deep inside to take a sip of the air and then return to where you find, satisfaction or contentment. So, and pleasant is the same, isn't it? Pleasant is just a completely trivial, sort of empty surface bit of horror. Whereas, deep, I like deep. Deep. Yeah, deep is a very good. Maybe I just take deep.
I mean, pleasant kind of reminds me of a bit in Brideshead Revisited where they talk about charm and the destructiveness of charm. And I think maybe it's like Englishness and pleasantness. It's a sort of cloying, deadening word.
Yeah, but charm's even worse. Charm is really toxic, I think. I mean, I went to a school where really all they taught you was charm at Eton. And you know that if you can be charming, you can essentially get away with anything. And so charm is deceit. Charm is probably quite an Odyssean quality. It is the kind of the necessary smoothness and kind of apparent self-reduction of charm allows you to get under any defense and to slip past any kind of any barrier. I think charm is really one of the wickedest things. Charm explains the entire catastrophe of the British government in the last decade. Boris is the charm merchant par excellence and will always pretend to be less capable than he is and not bother to be more capable than he is. That's the other thing. Because if you can do charm and if you can win through charm, you don't even really need to attend to the actualities.
What is your favorite curse word?
Well, can I say anything, however rude?
Yeah.
I really, when I'm really furious with someone, I call them a tosser.
Nice.
Probably because it takes one to know one.
Do you have any guilty pleasures?
My guilty pleasures. What I really love watching rugby on TV. Is that a guilty pleasure? I always feel it's a bit trivial. I drink far too much. Is that a guilty pleasure?
Maybe drinking.
Yeah, yeah. Well, definitely, I drink far too much, and I do love having a drink. And I love the beginning of an evening where you have that first drink and you think, oh, that's nice. And then I even like the kind of late. I love dancing parties, and I love dancing when slightly pissed. And I quite like actually writing when I've had a glass or two of wine, the liberation of it. and the sort of carelessness of it. Yeah, so maybe those are my guilty pleasures.
I mean, I'm still slightly recovering from a friend of mine had her 40th on Saturday. She was working for a drinks company, and they give a drinks allowance of £1,000,
Wow.
and so she had £1,000 worth of booze at her house.
How many people for the party?
20. Um,
So
so
50 quids were, were each. Was that some delicious wine? I
so
mean, you get maybe one
I
really, really good bottle of wine for that.
I only drank champagne the whole night.
Oh, you poor
Um,
man, poor man.
yeah, and
Tragic.
it was the worst hangover I've had in a while. The next day,
You know, champagne can do that. I love champagne occasionally, but not too much. Don't you
mm,
think just one glass is so good? When my father was very ill and dying about how long ago now? 20 years ago, he lay in bed at home and he had champagne and raspberries and cream for about 2 months as his sole sustenance, saying, I might as well have this now. And he was quite jolly on it. Yeah, be quite a good way to go. That is something I know that Odysseus says, doesn't he? That nothing is happier in life than sitting down with your friends with a well prepared party and seeing the table just groaning with wine. Oh, what a lovely thing that is.
I think one of the reasons why I love Homer, and I think it's why there's been this sort of rise in recent years of not necessarily actual Stoicism, but a sort of popular Stoicism. A lot of a sort of a fascination with sort of Marcus Aurelius and
Yes.
um,
There's an entire podcast dedicated to it, which
yeah,
I've been on.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh, and you get this sort of quotes, and I also think fake quotes from Marcus Aurelius appearing on Instagram and sort of everything like that.
Well, I've never quite understood what the core of this idea is. What is it, Aaron? What is the core of this neo stoicism? What if you had a nugget in the middle of it? What would it be?
So this is why I think it contrasts with Homer. Of like, I feel like the neo Stoicism is a sort of a denial of life, of a sort of it's important for men, and it's only really men, to live within a certain emotional range and not go beyond it, not be angry, not be happy, not be sad, not be joyful. Um, Men, in order to maintain control, have to exist at a certain equanimous position and also deny themselves things. And I feel like Homer's a contrast to that because it's living life to the fullest, whether it is a feast and sitting down with good people, or even tying yourself to a mast just to listen to the Song of the Sirens, just because you can be the only person in the world to have said that you've listened to the Song of the Sirens. And so I feel like the two are sort of in opposition to one another. Homer's about embracing life and living it to the fullest to live it, and then the sort of neo Stoicism is a kind of like putting yourself into a kind of box.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take on it. The Homeric world, to use that word, the Homeric universe, as I see it, is one that is absolutely in the grip of necessity. Things need to be and need to happen. And the standing of the human being in the face of that necessity is really fragile, is actually nearly impotent. And I know that people have described the Iliad, for example, as a tragedy of necessity, that it simply it's a world in which you cannot choose really to be any other than you are, or than the world is. And so if that's a true depiction, well, maybe this is the modern Stoicism. I mean, I don't know enough about it, but if your depiction of the modern Stoic is someone who thinks he has to choose to be how he is, and that it all depends on his own sense of self-control and his own moral structure and his own ability to impose that on his kind of wayward instincts and desires, then that, I so agree with you, could not be less heroic, because that picture of the choosing man is so vain. It elevates the ego so hugely into this kind of controlling organism. I am I, so I therefore will be as I want to be. Is a kind of incredible stupidity. I can't believe that Marcus Aurelius really thought that. I can imagine, that the not to insult the sweet guy who interviewed me, but the kind of neo-Stoicists may kind of be stuck in that, and there may be a sort of sub-Trumpian thing going on there. That you, in this awful degenerate world, only kind of the moral man can stand up and all the rest of it. In Homer, especially in the Iliad, which I think is the kind of the text, in fact, of these two. The Odyssey is an evolution and development from it, but we maybe talk about that in a minute. I always think of the Iliad as a kind of site of enormous, whatever it is, 10,000 line long, but enormous, but a site of absolute fixity, that there is a kind of rigidity of world discipline. And I can't remember, somewhere in the Iliad, someone says, don't you see that huge net that is dragging across the world and catching every life up in it? And this huge net is like the net of destiny, maybe the net of the gods' whims and powers. Maybe the fact that you have been put into this situation. This great. Are you a Heidegger fan, Aaron? Are you a reader of Heidegger? Martin Heidegger, the great 20th century German philosopher, who says, you can only really understand the human condition by knowing that you've been thrown into it, is his expression. You're just kind of chucked out of non-existence into this thing, and this thing then has you in its grip. So all the tragedies of the Iliad, the terrible, repeated, extraordinary suffering of that poem, is about the kind of hopelessness of the human predicament, and in the light of that hopelessness, asking the question, what do you do? How can you be in this? And there are all sorts of different answers thrown up by the poem. But so it's very interesting you should say that. I mean, that I've always kind of been in love with the Iliad for its completely fearless confrontation of that terrifying truth, that you are not free, that you are subject to the world as it is. And so much else, so much of the deep dive pleasant world fails to recognize it. And there's no, beautiful, beneficent God like a Christian God, nor even a sort of wonderful prophet, like a Muhammad or someone. Or there's no Buddha, there's no a great resolver of the agonies of existence. It just is like that. And it being like that then needs you to be in certain ways, or suggests lots of different ways of being. But I think that's the absolute beauty of the Iliad, is this refusal to dress up or soften this recognition of the condition of being as one in which you are likely to suffer. I mean, that's a jolly talk, isn't it?
Well, my lean has always been towards the Odyssey.
Okay, so I know you wanted to talk more about that. Okay, yes.
But see,
Have you read the Iliad? Have you read it, though?
I've
I'm putting you on the spot here, Aaron.
I've never been able to get beyond the list of ships.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, just if the one secret to reading the Iliad is when you're bored, skip. Skip on.
I mean,
Skip on, because one of the great things about the structure is the whole human drama heightens and heightens and heightens and heightens and heightens until the terrifying confrontation of Hector and Achilles under the walls of Troy, and then Achilles kills Hector and uses his body in the most horrific way, and then has the body taken back. He keeps it in his own tent, lying there as his sort of trophy. And then Hector's father, Priam, the king of Troy, who's been wailing and throwing all the mud of the streets of Troy on his head and so on, terrible grieving, decides to go to get his son back. And it's the most extraordinary scene when he travels at night across the battlefields, now all empty in at night, and all the Greeks are in their tents next to the sea. And Priam gets there and finds Achilles. And of course, the deadliest of enemies, when Hector is lying there. And then Priam, this great king of Troy, kneels before Achilles, the man who has just murdered his son in the most horrific way. And the two of them then clasp each other's hands. And in a sort of act of total kind of meeting, it's the most moving scene. And Achilles is thinking of his own father back in Greece and sort of mourning his absence from his father. And Priam, of course, is mourning the death of his great son, his favoured son, Hector, lying there beside them. And suddenly this whole huge agony of the killing in the battlefield does find a kind of moment, very, very transient moment of reconciliation in that meeting. And it's the most amazing vision in Iron Age Greece, 3,000 years ago, of love, actually. And that maybe just without ever banging some huge, never says this, but it doesn't bang that drum, that somehow maybe love is a momentary release from this prison of the world, So that's that, and it only means it because you've been wading through 10,000 lines of gore and knives and swords in livers and all the rest of it. So, yeah, why did I embark on that story?
I was going to say that. So my introduction to both the Iliad and the Odyssey, or the stories of them, was when I was 5 or 6. My primary school taught us the Greek myths, and something that still sticks in my mind is we were taught all of them. There was, we did the Minotaur and Theseus, we did the Trojan Wars, but the memory that always sticks in my mind is we were sort of taken into a little windowless room where we were always shown videos. And a huge TV and VHS machine was sort of wheeled in, and they pop in the video, and they showed us. It's actually an Australian cartoon version of the Odyssey.
Okay.
Yeah, that was it. I've actually found it on YouTube, and it must have been made late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
And I was transfixed by it. The bit that sort of stuck in my mind was the Trojan horse. because it has Odysseus uh, coming up with the idea and sort of the full sequence is only maybe a minute, 2 minutes long in an hour long film. But I was just like at 5 or 6, it kind of just struck me as like so smart and so clever, and I think that's when I like fell in love with Odysseus. And that sort of started my fascination. Um, and what I realized, I went on to study it like sixth form, doing the Odyssey, and I've read it over and over since then. And what you were saying about Heidegger and the world coming at you, I guess, I think the reason why I've always been fascinated by Odysseus is my definition of strategy is it's achieving your ambitions as stuff outside your control tries to stop you. And in the Iliad and in the Odyssey, there is so much trying to stop you. Um, the world, the universe, the gods, everything. And so why I think I sort of have always admired Odysseus is it's this ingenuity in trying to overcome all these things trying to stop you in a sort of clever, sometimes sneaky, sometimes ingenious way.
Yes, of course, that is absolutely central to who he is. And I mean, I do think that there probably was a great poet called Homer who did arrange these things, arrange these poems very carefully. And I think that you can see in these three figures, in Achilles, Hector, and Odysseus, a kind of triangle of options about how to be. That Achilles is really the world's first great idealist. He's a non-compromiser. He believes fiercely in what he believes in, which is usually himself. His sense of honor and the offendability of honor is enormous. But he's also a great lover of women, of young women. He loves this young woman that Agamemnon steals from him, the king. And he loves his great friend Patroclus, who is killed when wearing his armor. And the death of Patroclus drives him into a kind of utter despairing rage, sort of almost animalistic rage. And so he is, in a way, Achilles is the great kind of rigid idealist, you could say, I think, the kind of non-deal maker. Hector is absolutely embedded in the sort of social structures of Troy. He's very loyal to his father, to his wife, to his children. You see him with his brothers. He is the kind of honorable man who looks after his mother, is a kind of completely socialized being. And these two meet each other as the kind of the anarchic ideal and the instituted socialized being. And the kind of great battle or great sort of ideological battle in the heart of the Iliad is the meeting of those two forces embodied by those two men. And the final victory of Achilles over him, because he will stop at nothing. That man stops at nothing. Whereas Hector, who's very significantly running round and round the walls of his own city, he doesn't leave his own city, he doesn't go out into the plain to fight. He is chased by Achilles round and round his home patch, dies because loyalty to home patch loses to ruthless idealism, ruthlessly. So Odysseus emerges from that, as an idea structure, emerges from that confrontation as a kind of amalgam of them both. He is both absolutely ruthless. He's a destroyer of cities. He's called that in the first words of the Odyssey. Odysseus, destroyer of cities. And as soon as he leaves Troy to sail home, the first thing he does, he goes and destroys the city, kills all the men and rapes all the women. So There is nothing, no sweetheart in. He may have appeared in your cartoon when you were a boy as a sweetie pie.
They
He's
missed that
not
bit.
they cut that bit out exactly. But he's nifty. He's a liar. He's a cheat. He says one thing about something to one person, a different thing to another. He knows not to insult people. He can pretend when he's with the Cyclopses to be a nobody. That he says, "What is your name?" And he said in Greek, it's Outis, means nobody. He knows how to serve his own ends with extraordinary effectiveness. He knows. I remember writing in the Mighty Dead say it's like he's made of India rubber. If you think of Achilles, it's sort of made of an enormous block of totally brittle glass. Well, Odysseus is made of India rubber, and he bends, but he bends back, and that ability to kind of to give, to be like a kind of it's an element in a suspension, that you can kind of swing with the ways of the world is what guarantees his survival. And he knows when to submit. He goes and lives with the beautiful Calypso on her island for I think is it 9 years? I can't remember. 7
Definitely.
years. She makes him have sex with her every night for 7 years. An intolerable thing to have to do for anyone. But he does it. And then, and so it's fun. It's a very, very interesting and evolved picture of a hero. If
The,
you think this is one of our earliest. I mean, it's meant the Odyssey is meant to be slightly later than the Iliad, maybe written a generation later. So it's not the earliest depiction of a hero, which I think is Achilles. Achilles is the kind of raw fact of heroism. But even so, whenever it is, 680 or 690 BC, and already the idea of the hero is made immensely subtle, isn't it? That he is almost subtlety made flesh. And one of the qualities of the subtle is the storyteller. Um,
I mean,
That you don't really state the facts if you're Odysseus. You don't say this is how it is, this is how it is, and this is what I'm going to do. You just will weave. What's the adjective in Greek is polytropos, which means many wayed, and it means that he's gone many ways, but he also has many ways, and he is many ways, and he lives in this kind of braided stream of possibility, which I think. Well, it's interesting. Your definition of strategy is a very good one, but I think another possibility for that is to keep possibilities alive. The strategy is never closing off your possibilities and always having all the stream,
exactly.
all the elements of that braided stream equally alive.
There's a line of yours in The Mighty Dead that I think is also a good definition of strategy. Uh, and you say that the Odyssean moment is everything liquid but directed, and
Mm.
everything mobile but related.
Who would have thought I was such a good writer as that?
But also, what something that struck me reading The Mighty Dead as well was this tension between Achilles and Odysseus, and as you said it in the Iliad, there's a brutal, literally brutal, honesty of Achilles, of like he's there to kill you, take your possessions, and forever be known as your conqueror. That's the sort of brutal frankness of, say, the Iliad. And then what kind of occurred to me is, as you said, Odysseus is as violent as Achilles, but his violence is always um, masked by dishonesty. So, like the Trojan horse is a subterfuge. Um, the Cyclops Polyphemus, that's done with subterfuge before the act of violence. And then when he returns home to Ithaca, he disguises himself as a beggar to pull off another subterfuge to infiltrate the palace and slaughter, the suitors who are trying to marry his wife. So an idea occurred to me reading The Mighty Dead is kind of how did people at the time view the morality of that? Of sort of you had the honesty of Achilles who like, I'm here to kill and or be killed, and a sort of honor in there. And then Odysseus where it's like using trickery to inflict violence.
Absolutely, it's an incredibly important question to do with their morality in their frame of mind. I mean, what you're talking about really is the ambush.
Mm.
That the Achillean form of war is a confrontation, and you just meet the guy, and you slice him up, or he slices you up. But there are other people in the Greek army who are experts in ambush, and there's a whole book, I think, book 10, I think, which is all about nighttime, which Odysseus is a part, nighttime ambushing and murdering of young warriors and stuff. And clearly, I think you can say that the question is alive in Homer's mind. That is the ambush honorable, because you aren't giving your enemy the benefit of the knowledge that you have about him, and so it is essentially demeaning of the enemy, because you're not elevating the enemy into an equal combatant. You're making him into a kind of sacrificial victim, in effect, because he has no response to the ambush. And so it is a kind of, I think you can say that if you demean your enemy, I mean, this is one line, if you demean your enemy, you demean yourself. You could think of that as like in the medieval knightly context, that obviously the meeting of equal foes is the point of honor. And if you ambush someone, as Odysseus repeatedly does, there's no honor, there's no equality in the meeting, and there's no honor in it, and Odysseus is maybe demeaned himself. And yet, every single aspect of modern war, for example, is about the ambush. The modern war evolved as a kind of fact of ambush. And so I think it's a kind of, just as, Odysseus evolves from the Achilles Hector confrontation, you could say that his need to cheat, or his victory through cheating, his victory through concealment, is itself also a kind of evolution away from the, I attempted to say, the stupidities of honor. There's something ridiculous about, if you want to kill someone, if you want to beat them, if you want to acquire their city, there's something ridiculous about giving him a chance to fight back. Of course he shouldn't. And so I think you can even say that in that quality, the question is alive in the Greek poems, whether this is right. Do you really admire Odysseus for doing all of this? I don't know. It's moot, I would say. Nevertheless, it's sort of, you can imagine for the audience at the time, probably Homer was reciting these poems on the eastern shores of the Aegean to cities full of traders and merchants and adventurers in the early Mediterranean trade. And I think one of the qualities that Odysseus has is as a dealer. He's a trader and a dealer. And he's not a kind of stuffy old brigadier, who is very ramrod upright and believing in all the kind of old-fashioned moral codes. He wants to get his way, and that early mercantile political, it's the invention of the city is going on at the time. They're inventing sort of oligarchies, merchant oligarchies by which these cities are ruled. Oh, Aaron, I'm so sorry. That's a phone. Hang on. It's another break. Another break. Sorry. Hello. Hello. No, I'm just doing this interview, which you've interrupted. Don't worry. Okay, bye. Well, yeah, that's right. So it's right. The context for Homer is this mercantile, oligarchic, adventuring, slightly dealing in the edge world of these early Greek cities, and of course, uh, Odysseus is heroic for his. They would have loved the way in which he transgressed in a kind of naughty way. Maybe the things even that appealed to you as a boy. He wasn't obeying everything the teacher said, was he? He was slipping his way out of fixes and difficulties. And you think as a boy, you look at that and say, oh yeah, he's getting away with it. Well, come on. I'm sure there's a lot of
I
it
mean,
in
that touches on something else I feel Odysseus illustrates well, which is again, I guess I call it the strategist's dilemma of proving to people how great a strategist you are by telling them your strategies, and therefore them being on guard with you or frustrating your strategies in future. And I kind of think on the one hand, the effect of Odysseus's reputation as a liar and a cheat or a dissembler, and everyone knowing him to be that, and him having to maneuver his way around that. And then also, I've never felt more seen than the story of Odysseus and Cyclops. And his great trick is, as you said, he tells him his name is No Man. So after he stabs his eye out, and Polyphemus screams that No Man has blinded him, so the other Cyclops don't bother to check on him, and Odysseus and his men escape. And then just before they're due to sail away, Odysseus can't help but boast his trick and how his real name is actually Odysseus. And then Polyphemus tells his father, Poseidon, what Odysseus has done. And I thought, I too have outmaneuvered people and then made the stupid mistake of boasting about it. So I feel that's another thing about Odysseus, that the strategist dilemma of like revealing yourself and then that harming your future strategies.
I get that. It's very interesting. I mean, I have a slightly different take on that, which is that I think that you could say the identity of Odysseus is strung between being no one and Odysseus. That he's so slippery and he's so polytropical, you could say, that he is sort of nobody and he can become anybody. And he is as liquid as the sea, and he is as mobile as his journeys, on the one hand. And on the other hand, Odysseus, the etymology of the name Odysseus is the man who suffers, And he is also this, well, I suppose the modern term would be someone you can relate to, because he actually is rather like what we all think we are. That he's coping. Life's throwing stuff at him. He wins sometimes. He loses often. The huge powers of of the sea, of Poseidon, the god of the sea, but also of earthquakes, of disruption, of trouble, of kind of the unreliability of things is what Poseidon is the god of. And that is his great enemy. And it's because so, yeah, I think you could say that Odysseus' strategy is to be the self-asserter in the face of trouble and the nobody who slips out of the corners. And it's exactly that dialogue which gives him his power, that he is not fixed as a slippery shit, and he's not fixed as an Achillean hero, but he can do both. And so when he arrives, as you say, he cheats and disguises himself when he gets home to Ithaca. But my God, the slaughter he then enacts is not nobody doing that to the suitors in his house, and it's all the skills and the unforgiving violence of what he does to them and to the poor girls that they've all slept with. That's, I think, the most shocking thing in the whole story is when he strings up these poor girls who've been seduced and who knows raped by the men hanging out in his palace. And Homer says, and he strung them up and their legs kicked like little sparrows as he hanged them. So what does the story do? It gives you this amazingly fluid, liquid, nobody life, which then ends up in probably the most brutal act of self-assertion in the whole of Homer. So that the nobody becomes this utterly assertive somebody and wins. But then
the end fascinates me in a political sense because the reputation of Odysseus is as skillful a politician, a diplomat, thinking of maneuvering, and then the political problem of the suitors is that they are the sons of all the lords in his kingdom, in surrounding kingdoms, and he wipes them all out. And I've always sort of thought how politically that's probably wasn't the smartest thing for Odysseus to do. And I can't remember if it's in the poem of like there's a confrontation afterwards between the families of the suitors and Odysseus, and there's an agreement for a ceasefire and a sort of. But I've always thought it wasn't as political as maybe you would expect Odysseus to be.
No, I mean, the end of the poem is very strange, and people have always been very worried about it because the kind of juice has gone out of it. All of that stuff at the end of the poem is a terrible kind of muddle and ends inconclusively. And I don't think you can kind of see. It's not like, oh, I see. So there we are. We've arrived at the great political reconciliation. So is not it. I think the juice of the poem is precisely in the telling of the poem. It's no chance that it's a long sequential thing. It's not a painting. Here you are. This is the process that this extraordinary version of humanity has gone through over these thousands and thousands of lines. And I think that it's exactly that unresolved dialogue between man and no man is maybe a kind of strategic lesson that in fact to solidify your identity is itself a form of failure, and that both Achilles and Hector failed. And Odysseus maybe did not fail in the end. He in fact survived, and survived as the winner. And look, we're talking about him now. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, I think that's the most extraordinary thing, that these issues are so alive in our minds about choosing how to be, or choosing 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 not choosing how to be, if you know what I mean. By choosing not to have an identity, you become kind of alive to the world and in the world.
Next year, Christopher Nolan's going to be releasing his film
Mm.
version of the
Yeah,
Odyssey.
yeah.
Uh, and so you might have already addressed it, but I was going to ask, what do you hope he'll convey in the film?
Yeah, I know. Obviously, I know about it. But I mean, I hope to avoid cheese because, and you hope to, I think it would almost be marvelous, a film of the Odyssey with no dialogue. I think the spoken words are probably the most difficult thing of all to convey. Or even, I mean, this perhaps a slightly purist position. I mean, I would love it to be in Greek. So you didn't understand what it said, but you felt, um, you know, the agony and the triumph of this life. The kind of the man who suffers, and those extraordinary scenes, when after the storm and his raft is his beautiful the sailing on the raft for 17 days when he leaves Calypso, and then the storm, and then coming ashore to Nausicaa on the shore, and then hearing the bard in the palace, in her father's palace, beginning to tell the story of Troy, and Odysseus sitting there in the hall, and he's the kind of guest of honor. And then this story comes out of everything that he's lived through the past 10 years. And the only thing he can do is to kind of sit there with his cloak over his head. Do you remember that? And do you know the colour of the cloak? The cloak is a sea blue cloak. It's his world of fluidity. Just kind of, he buries himself back in it to hear this story of grief. And those are the, if the poetry, in other words, if the poetry could survive, that would be a beautiful thing. I mean, I loved Oppenheimer. Did you watch that?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And it was incredibly beautifully made film. And if it could be as rich and subtle as that, I mean, it's so hard, the Odyssey, and it's so soft. It's so kind of impositionally hard, and it's so delicate, the actual path of the hero through it all. And that's a very difficult thing to get right, I think.
Mate, have you seen Nolan's Inception?
No.
Oh, well, so when I thought of the question to ask you what you would hope to see conveyed in the Odyssey, it occurred to me that he's already done the story in Inception,
No,
uh,
okay.
because the way it occurred to me was there's a you talk about in the Mighty Dead, the shore in Homer, and sort of the line about the sea had soaked his heart through,
Yeah,
when Odysseus sort of washes up on the shore of the Phaeacians after Poseidon tries to kill him.
yeah.
And Inception opens with that. Like
Mm,
Leonardo DiCaprio is washed up on the shore of unconsciousness, and
right.
he it is his heart soaked through when he comes to washed up on the shore. And then I end up watching it again last night. I haven't watched it for maybe like 15 years or something. And then I started ticking off all the similarities with the Odyssey of like it's about a man on a quest to return to his family. Um, his material ambitions have frustrated his return. There's a necessary journey to the underworld. Um, the story is about a man who infiltrates dreams to steal people's secrets. Uh, so every infiltration of a dream is a metaphorical Trojan horse. And then there's even a version of the Lotus Eaters, because there's a particular scene where they go to an underground, almost like an opium den, but it's people who go there to dream, and they're sort of rigged up to this sort of shared dream device. And they do it to escape the troubles. There's a particular line where the guy who looks after this dream den sort of says, the dreams become their reality, and so yeah, so I was sort of thinking he's already done the story, so it'd be interesting to see
That's so
how
interesting.
he.
I will watch that this evening. That's so fascinating. Thank you. That's a great gift. Inception. Is it on? What's it on? Is it on something?
I think you'd be able to rent it on
I'll
something.
find it somewhere.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, it's one of his best films, but also it's just it just occurred to me it is the Odyssey,
Yeah.
um, just
Interesting.
refashioned.
Yeah. I was
Um,
thinking because of course he does get thrown up on that beach, and then he also gets thrown up on the beach in Ithaca, doesn't he? And he doesn't know where he is, and so that is entirely repeated kind of dissolution of the man. I mean, I think that's a very interesting study to say how many times in the Odyssey does Odysseus kind of disappear, that he actually melts into nothing to come back up again as another way. Yeah, interesting. Great.
uh,
Thanks, Aaron. That's lovely.
Finally, I was just going to ask, you published a book earlier this year, Bird School. Are you working on anything now, or are you taking a break?
I am writing a book about the sea, about the sea on the west coast of Scotland. And I want to write about it, which in my mind is called the human sea. It's called, and I want to write about the history of people in that sea and organisms in that sea, and to see how I've been reading a lot recently about the whole Selkie myth. You know, this the myth of the seals that come ashore and take their fur or their fur coat off and become human beings and then return. And it's a very, very shared myth all down the Atlantic seaboard of Europe. And the relationship between seals and human beings there and all kinds of other things. Anyway, yeah, that's kind of another exercise in liquefaction, you could say. Yeah.
Um, Adam Nicolson, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Aaron. It's been a treat. Thank you for asking me.